The hardest thing has probably been creating the emotional support that you need to be a successful entrepreneur, because imposter syndrome stalks you on a daily basis. You think you are the only one who has woken up that morning and felt like your entire life is failing. Then you talk to 3 other entrepreneurs and they're all staring off the edge of the same cliff. You're like, oh, okay, cool.
You're listening to The Creative Impostor, episode number 50. Welcome to The Creative Impostor. I'm Andrea Klunder, your host, and today I am going to keep this intro short and sweet because we are talking with Katy Flatau, who is someone who I have been meaning to get on this show pretty much ever since it launched. Have you ever thought about changing careers? Have you changed careers? Do you want to change careers right now? Katy is the person who can help you do it and not feel quite so much like a crazy person. Katy is the founder and CEO of a company called Mindful You and is a certified life coach who focuses on helping you navigate career change and life balance. I've known Katy for a long time. I met her originally when my yoga studio business was brand new and growing and thriving, and I was all naive and hopeful. And she knew me when we were growing and expanding into a bigger space. And she knew me when the business started to waver and when I started to get tired. And she knew me when I closed that yoga studio business. And somewhere along the lines, we started a company together, and that was Mindful You. And somewhere along the lines, we decided to part ways. In a business sense, but we are still friends and we are still colleagues and we still love what each other do. And that is part of why we decided to part ways in the business sense. And so these are all of the reasons why we are talking with Katy today on The Creative Impostor. This month's theme is all about coaching. And Katy is probably the first life coach I ever actually met who could explain to me what it was and why it was valuable without me rolling my eyes. She brings a huge wealth of knowledge and experience from working in corporate America sales in media research, together with her commitment to helping successful professionals find a more meaningful balance to their life and work, together with mindfulness tools and techniques, together with a great sense of humor and compassion. Through Mindful You, Katy leads online courses and in-person workshops in Chicago. She also does one-on-one coaching and leads an annual retreat to Hawaii that I have got to go on one of these days. In this episode, we talk about what coaching is and isn't, and why it might be something for you to look into if you are ready to make some kind of change in your life and want to do it without making yourself totally crazy. We talk about how she did the thing. You know, that thing where you leave a cushy corporate America sales job and then become an entrepreneur and start your own business. Yeah, she's done that and she's still working her way through it. And she's super honest about what it took to make that happen, what the challenges have been, and what she has done to mitigate those challenges. Did I mention that we talk about imposter syndrome? Oh, and to make it even juicier, you're going to want to stick around to the end of this conversation because, as you know, I have been trying to make things a little more interesting and a little more challenging for myself on the show, putting myself into uncomfortable situations. And so for the first time, she and I discuss exactly how our partnership dissolved a couple of years ago and whether it was for the best and why. All of the show notes and resources we mention in this episode, including links to connect with Katy and get her free Jumpstart Your Change kit, will be at thecreativeimpostor.com/050. Yep, it's episode 50, y'all. Here's my conversation with Katy Flatau of Mindful You.
Okay, so I'm Katy Flatau. I am a career strategy and life balance coach, and I own a company called Mindful You. And part of why it is called Mindful You, and I talk about life balance in the context of doing career strategy, is because nothing in our lives ever exists in a vacuum. And 99% of the people I work with on some kind of career change are also in need of balancing either the emotions that come with that or in creating balance in some other area of their life as well. So typically I am working with mid-career professionals, so people who've been working for, let's call it somewhere between 10 and even 30 years. So people who are kind of in the midst of their career, because typically we all work for somewhere between, 40 and 50 years on a normal span. And so usually the people I'm working with are either ready to do something different, they're working on some kind of big career change that they've been thinking about for a long time, or they're ready to start making the moves from being in corporate, being an employee, working for somebody else, and they're ready to start evolving to being an entrepreneur. And I also help people kind of start at the beginning of all of this, where they come to me and they're like, hey, I'm just really unhappy in my job right now, and I need to figure out what change I need to make. How do I start figuring that out? Because I just can't keep waking up every Monday miserable, and I'm really sick of being depressed every Sunday night.
And aren't there, I don't know if you know stats, I'm terrible with numbers and stats, but aren't there some crazy stats about, especially in the United States, the percentage of people who are either apathetic to their job or their work, or like B, actually miserable?
There are, and I think that statistic is somewhere around 40% are apathetic, and then another 20 to 30 are actively miserable. Which means that's a pretty high number of people who just aren't enjoying the thing they spend at least 8 hours every day doing. And being that miserable every day that you're going to work, especially when you're spending so much of your time on it, because we spend about 40% of our lives involved in our careers. That's not leaving us much time to balance out career misery with anything else.
Career misery. I like that phrase. Sounds horrible.
It does.
So if people are apathetic or unhappy or miserable, why do you think it's so hard for people to make a shift to something better?
So what I've found is that there's not a really clearly defined process out there. There's no rule book that we get when you graduate from college and it's like, here, go do your career. We don't get this kind of background framework that says, okay, here's how you figure out how to end up doing something that you're happy. We're not really taught to manage our careers. We're kind of just taught to push forward and do the thing that brings the paycheck back every night. And yes, there's a huge chunk of people who are like, yes, and then I'm going to get promoted and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. So we're kind of given this idea that success means climbing the corporate ladder. But when that stops feeling satisfying, we don't have a good guidebook out there that says, this is how you solve for this. This is how you decide to create happiness. So there's a lot of people sitting there in that fear that if they change anything, they're going to end up more miserable, and they just can't see the light on how to get out of that. And that's a lot of what I talk to people about, is how do we turn that light on for you so you can start moving forward? Because, to be completely honest, your ideal career change is not going to walk into your office and say, hey, here's the perfect thing for you. Come on, we're going to save you from this thing you hate doing.
Why not? It would be so much easier if it happened that way.
I know. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing?
So then, okay, I think that in my world and in the work that I do and in the work that you do, it seems like coaching is the hot career right now. Everyone's a life coach, a business coach, a career coach, a money coach, a lifestyle coach, a mindset coach, all these different types of coaches. And so I start to sometimes feel like everyone is a coach these days. And I know that that is partly because of my circle of people, but also I know that there are people out there who are like, do I need a coach? Or how is a coach different than a therapist or a counselor? Can you break that down?
So the coolest thing that I think about coaching even existing is that we all have moments in our life where we need help. And the help we need isn't always going to be coming from a therapist, which is kind of the traditional role, right? People think, oh, you're having a hard time right now, you need a therapist. And the block that a lot of people run into is, well, maybe I don't really need a therapist right now because this isn't a big enough problem, or this is a work problem, right? It's not a touchy-feely problem, which is how most of us think of therapy. And there's a ton of different kinds of therapy out there now, so there's different ways to access all of those things. So the way I like to think about those two things is, because I'm a huge fan of therapy, and a lot of my clients have either done their therapy journey or are doing it at the same time that they have a coach, and we serve two different purposes for them. So therapy takes you from where you are right now, and it helps you explore everything that's happened to you thus far and how it's manifesting itself in your life right now. So if you're dealing with something like anxiety, you can go back and figure out, okay, this is when this started. This is what it's related to. This is where all of this is coming from. And that's amazing and really, really helpful when you're trying to figure out how to move forward. Coaching takes you from where you are now and helps you to come up with a strategy for where you're going. So here's where you are now. Here's what you want to do next. Here's the problem that you're running into. Awesome. How do we come up with a plan and start to implement it, allow you to be accountable within that, and create space for you to actually work on this. So we create this really safe space for them to talk about this problem that they're having without, and I don't want to call it judgment per se, but without the judgment of someone else. So let's use your example of everyone in corporate jobs should be happy, or everyone who's an entrepreneur should be happy. And you and I have both been on both sides of that, and we know that that's just not true. But when you have the great job and you have the amazing experience and everyone from the outside thinks your life is great, right? You and I have both been there too. Like, oh, you've got everything together. Of course you must be happy. You own a yoga studio. Oh, you've got a fancy 6-figure job and you get to travel all the time. Of course you must be happy. Sometimes you can't sit people down and say, but I hate what I'm doing and I wake up miserable every day and I just need to figure out how to do something else. A lot of people respond with, but your life is great. Why are you upset? Or you run into the friend thing or the family thing where they don't want you to change because it means change for them. Mm-hmm. Right? If you've ever had to tell your mother you're thinking about moving across the country, that's a great example of how that comes up. But also the people in our lives who love us and support us typically want us to be happy, and they want us to be happy. And I don't think this is a conscious thing, but they usually want us to be happy as quickly as possible. And sometimes when we're trying to create real change in our lives, we kind of have to go through a process that says, okay, I'm going to explore this first, and I'm going to explore this first, and I'm going to explore this first. It's not as simple as just checking a couple boxes and now I wake up happy every day. Mm-hmm. So coaching really provides that great, and I like to call it a container sometimes. It gives you a place to come in and say, I am really frustrated with my job, even though I'm good at it. Even though I'm successful, even though from the outside it looks great, I'm really frustrated with what's happening. I need to figure out how to move forward in this.
So you yourself, you being a career change coach totally makes sense because you have in fact done that. You have not always been a coach, but I met you, whenever on earth that was, when I had recently started my first business, which was the yoga studio, and you were coaching and you were kind of doing like general life coaching and kind of figuring out what your niche was going to be, and thought, hey, we should partner together on some things and do some workshops together and explore this entrepreneurial thing. Tell us a little bit about what you were doing when you first got into coaching and why you started exploring this other thing on the side, and then how you came to decide that you really needed to make the change from the corporate gig to coaching as your own business full time.
For me, I got to the place where I realized I needed to do something else because I had moved a couple of times across the country and was starting to realize that, kind of wherever you go, there you are. You can't move far enough away to escape yourself. You're always going to be there, and kind of the thrill of relocation wears off after a little while. And the company I was working for then went through a little bit of a restructure and an acquisition, and there was just a lot of change involved in that and a lot of layoffs and shifts. And I just kind of got to this point where I was sitting there and I'm like, this is not what I want to be doing anymore. I don't love this enough to continue to put up with the chaos that's kind of being dumped on my life on a daily basis. I really felt like I didn't have any control and I was at somebody else's mercy. So for me, I took the traditional approach and I'm like, all right, well, what other companies in my industry can I work for? And I went and I interviewed with a few different ones and explored that. And I was like, all right, well, I'm not really excited to go do the same thing somewhere else, right? Because sometimes that's the solution. But for me, I figured out that that really wasn't it. And at that point, I was in sales. I worked in the media industry. And I'm like, well, maybe if I sell something else, right? Maybe I'll love doing that. Maybe I'm just not selling the right product. So I looked at that and I was like, okay, nope, I don't really want to go just sell something else for somebody. And so that's when I really started shifting into, okay, what are the questions you need to answer here? And I realized that what I wanted to do was wake up every day and feel excited and fulfilled about what I was doing. So I took a big step back and I said, okay, what do I love most about what I do already, right? Because I didn't hate my job. I was just frustrated and knew that it wasn't the path that I wanted to stay on. And so I thought about it and I'm like, okay, I really love working with clients. I love talking to people. I love helping people solve problems because I did a lot of that. And I love helping people come up with a strategy to get to where they want to be. I'm like, okay, these things all kind of fit together. So I started looking for careers that involved those things. And it was like, oh, all right, well, let me find something where I get to work with people, I get to solve problems, I get to come up with strategies. And I went what I call a short way down many, many paths as part of that. And as I moved forward in that, I would start to come up with new questions and I would get to a certain place and I'd be like, okay, what's the job that you're doing at the end of this? Because the part of career change that nobody ever talks about is the research phase, which is probably the most frustrating and the most interesting. And you learn so much about yourself as part of it, but it's a really scary place to enter into because you do hit a lot of roadblocks. And you do run into a lot of places where you're like, oh yeah, this is not the right thing. Again, am I ever going to find the right thing? And I had kind of gotten to that place. I had decided, okay, maybe I'll go get my PhD in psychology. Maybe I'll do industrial and organizational psych, which I think was going to end me up working as a consultant or in HR somewhere. And what I realized is that none of that was a huge yes for me. Because I was also kind of getting to the phase where I'm like, I think I'm ready to work for myself. This is something I really want to try at some point in my life. So let's push towards this. And so I was kind of getting to the answers to those questions. And I'm like, this is as close as I have gotten. This PhD in psychology is as close as I've gotten to having a yes. And I still can't quite get to the end and send in the application. I had the application already on my desk and I had all my transcripts and my letters of recommendation and all this great stuff. And I was reading this little course catalog for a local company in Chicago that does all these kind of ad hoc courses. And there was one that was called Learn to be a Life Coach. And it was a little 2-hour seminar. I think it cost $30. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, I don't really know what this life coaching thing is, but it kind of sounds like what I want to do. So let me go check this out. I got 15 minutes into that seminar and was like, yes, this is the thing. I can see the other end of this. What I will be doing after I complete my training is exactly what I want to be doing.
Mm. Well, so let's talk just briefly a little bit about becoming a life coach, because we talked about how there's a coach on every corner these days and a lot of people who are like, oh yeah, I give great advice. I should be a life coach. And, I've seen these hybrid programs popping up. Oh, get your yoga certification and also become a yoga life coach at the same time. And I'm like, what the heck is a yoga life coach? So how do you differentiate between somebody who is a legit coach, meaning that they have like certain tools to actually help somebody, versus somebody who just feels that they give great advice and so they they decide that their new business is going to be life coaching?
And there's so much of that out there right now, and it's equal parts frustrating and exciting. So kind of looking at it and saying, wow, it's really cool that there's this space where you can find your spot in it, right? Because there wouldn't be a coach on every corner if there weren't that many different things to coach people about. What I have found after having done this for many years now is that giving great advice is a really small part of being a coach. Because what I'm trying to do with every client is to help them get to where they want to be. And their journey is most likely not going to be my journey. So the most important part of that relationship is me being able to help them get really clear on their next step. So more than giving them good advice, I'm asking them good questions. So it's my job to be a great listener. And obviously in certain moments, it's my job to provide guidance on here are the steps you can take to get to where you want to go. And the steps usually involve, okay, like I was talking about the research phase when you're looking at a career change. Okay, you're in the research phase. Here are several different ways to go about this phase. Let's figure out the one that's going to work best for you so you actually make it happen. But probably the most important thing that I do is I give them a safe space to talk about their change where they're not going to be judged and there's no pressure to be anything more than who they are in that moment. I just had a client recently who said the best part of working on her career change with me was that she didn't have to dump it all on her husband, who was also working on some stuff at the same time. And she's like, I just feel great that I have this place to talk about this. And I can say whatever I want and not worry that I'm going to stress you out more. So there's so much stuff involved in that is around keeping healthy boundaries for your clients. For me, some of it is detaching from an outcome. I run into this a lot with people when we go through the career change process. A lot of my clients will end up with 2 job offers because they're taking all the right steps and they're networking and they're connecting with people. And so a lot of times they'll get to the same space with 2 companies at the same time, which is fantastic. But that's the moment where I feel like my coach training kicks in. I can't tell you which of these jobs to take. This is your decision. I can help you weigh all the factors and I can ask you the questions and I can help you talk about them and I can help you get clear on why you feel the way you feel. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to be the person doing that job. To me, that's the big difference between giving great advice and being a qualified coach.
And so then how did you, going back to your story, once you had discovered this new path for yourself of life coaching and you are still working in your corporate media sales job, which you don't hate and it's not horrible and it pays well and you're super successful. And from the outside, some people would be like, why are you doing this weird life coaching thing? Because I think you started coaching at a time when people were like, what the F is a life coach? Like, what does that mean?
Definitely.
Tell me a little bit about what steps that you needed to take or what needed to happen for you to move from coaching on the side while you have this full-time corporate job to actually coming into starting your own business with Mindful You and really embracing that role as a coach.
So as I was going through and doing all of that, I felt like it was really important before I made any massive decisions, right? Because I tend to be kind of a planner. You know, give me a nice spreadsheet and a pro-con list and I'm a happy girl.
Which is why we complement each other, because I am not that.
Exactly. So it was coming up with that, okay, first I need to test this out, right? Because there's so much of that, like you go to coaching school and then you're excited and you've got some new clients. But then also I knew that just announcing to the world that I was a life coach wasn't going to get me to that next step. I needed to understand what I wanted to coach on. I needed to have a better idea of what my business needed to look like. And when I did coach training, there was very little, this is how you set up a business as a coach. And I'm sure you experienced the same thing as a yoga teacher.
Totally.
Right? The business of yoga is not something that comes with your certification most often.
You get like 2 hours.
Yeah. And I think you and I in both the industries that we're in saw that happen to so many people where it was like, oh, let me go take this big risk. And then we knew a ton of yoga teachers who weren't making enough money. And I knew a ton of coaches, still know a ton of coaches who are evolving through that process. And it's like, and it comes as kind of a shock. So for me, it was really important that I do it in a way that made me comfortable because I also didn't want to go from living my very nice salaried job and living that lifestyle to having to downsize to a tiny studio apartment just so I could make this career change. I was trying to look at everything holistically, which is why at the beginning I referenced being a life balance coach, because when you change your career, everything else in your life also can change. So it's important to look at all those things and say, okay, here's the big change I want to make. What else is this going to impact? And I didn't want to not be able to travel. I didn't want to be stuck in some certain place and only be able to eat rice and beans, which my parents thought was very funny. They're present to me. When I actually finally did make the transition was a giant bag of rice and like 7 different kinds of beans. They thought they were hilarious. So it was thinking about how I wanted it to feel when I made the transition, because I really didn't think that I would be successful if I just ripped myself out of one thing and didn't give myself a nice safety net to actually work through all the tough stuff that comes with being an entrepreneur. which I knew a little bit about and I knew a heck of a lot more about after 2 years of doing this. So it's not that, oh, and now I'm an entrepreneur and everything is glorious. I've escaped from corporate. There are certain parts of that, but there's a lot of other stuff that comes with it. So I put together kind of a 3-year transition plan to go from being in corporate, and then I added in coaching on the side. So I was doing, like you said, I was working with a few clients. I was coaching on weekends and in the evenings. And you and I were running workshops together. Probably once or twice a month, we would do an evening or a weekend workshop. And so doing that really helped me figure out, A, what I wanted to be talking about. It helped me to test out what people were kind of naturally coming to me for. But I got to test out, okay, what does it feel like to work in the evenings, right? I was used to working a 9 to 5. So some of it was testing the lifestyle shift that I was looking at. Some of it was being really strategic about saving money. Some of it was making sure that I had kind of set myself up for success in terms of like big purchases I wanted to make, because it's a heck of a lot easier to, you know, go buy a car and get a good financing rate if you have the corporate job. So it was looking at all of those things and saying, okay, how do I want to make this move, and how do I want to make this transition, and what am I excited to do and not do? So I set all of that up, and then I gave myself a timeline, and I kind of had that moment. I came back from vacation. I'd been in Hawaii, and my boss asked me, he said, hey, how was your vacation? And I'm like, well, it was great. I only made one mistake. He's like, oh yeah, what was that? I'm like, I came back. And I was kidding when I said it, but a few hours later I was sitting there and I'm like, yeah, it's time. And so I set myself up for about 6 months because, of course, right before leaving, I had gotten promoted because that's just how this stuff works, right?
It's like the universe testing you. Are you sure you really want to do that?
Absolutely. And that happens so often, right? You make the big decision and then the universe says, hey, is this really what you want? So I set myself up because it was really important to me not to burn bridges as I made the change, because I really adored the people that I'd been working with at that point for 13 years. So I wanted to do it in a way that felt like it had a high level of integrity. And I just made sure that all the pieces were in place so I could leave at the right moment. Because as anyone who's ever done this will tell you, there's never a perfect moment to leave. You just have to pick one and go with it. But that moment for me that was like, nope, you really, now is the time, was that moment when I got back from vacation and was like, yep, this is now starting to be my past and I'm ready to step into my future.
What's been the hardest thing about making that change?
So the hardest thing has probably been creating the emotional support that you need to be a successful entrepreneur. And talking to the creative imposter about this is absolutely perfect, because that's exactly what happens, right? When you're isolated as an entrepreneur, imposter syndrome stalks you on a daily basis. You think you are the only one who has woken up that morning and felt like your entire life is failing. Then you talk to 3 other entrepreneurs and they're all staring off the edge of the same cliff. You're like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah. Right? And then you talk to everybody again a week later and everyone shifted positions. And then 3 weeks later, you know, you're kind of all evolving. And if you're not in tune with other people who are going through the process, you constantly feel like you're on the edge of that cliff and that you're the only one out there and everyone else is succeeding and running retreats in Paris and making 6 figures or closing $50,000 in 2 hours. That was the email I just got like before this call, was someone saying how to close 50 grand in 2 hours. And I was like, okay, right? A lot of entrepreneurship is waking up every morning and putting one foot in front of the other and working through that. I'm not doing the right thing, or this thing didn't work, or that thing didn't work. So now what do I do? And, you know, I need to manage my finances, and I need to do this, and I need to do that. And I'd still like to have a life while I do all of these things, because I didn't leave my full-time corporate travel job where I was running all over the country and was only home on weekends and essentially would just collapse onto my couch, order enough Thai food for 3 days, and do my laundry and repack my suitcase. I didn't leave all of that so I could lock myself in my condo and sit here and worry about my coaching business, right? I did some of that so I could have a life again. So for me, it was finding the people that I needed to be part of my life that were different than the people I already had. And I didn't get rid of people, but I definitely had to kind of intentionally acquire some new connections. Mm-hmm. And that to me has made a massive difference, because that really was the toughest part.
What does your creative imposter voice say to you
you're never going to be successful enough.
Oh, that word, enough.
Right? Always. It's like, it doesn't matter how much business you just closed. You know, as an entrepreneur, you're always moving to the next thing. And I worked in sales for a long time. So, you know, that idea that you need to always be closing is a part of things. But, you know, when you're doing it for yourself, it's also a new client is food on the table or paying your mortgage or, you know, it's all of those things are so much more connected than they were when the direct deposit just popped in at the end of the week. So for me, that imposter voice is always like, you haven't done enough. You're not successful enough. You need to keep going.
You can't go out for wine with your friends. You still have to keep working.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, it's Saturday morning? No, you shouldn't lay in bed for an extra half an hour. You should get up and write a new course. You know, you haven't written enough blog posts this week. You need to send another newsletter. Have you posted on Facebook? Right? Because there is always something else you should be doing.
So one thing that I'm doing on the show right now is trying to put myself in uncomfortable situations and talk about things that are not easy for me to talk about, because at this point, talking about entrepreneurship, talking about creativity, talking about mindfulness, talking about imposter syndrome, even like all of that, now I've been doing it enough that it's comfortable and it's easy. And what happens is then it starts to get a little boring. So I just want to spend a few minutes on this little exercise if you'll entertain me. When I was going through yoga studio, somewhat growing and thriving, yoga studio starting to go downhill, that was at the time that actually you and I came together to found Mindful You, which was originally a partnership between us. And we were working on how do we bring together the coaching expertise that you have in those like tools and structures, and then the meditation background and the mindfulness tools and training, and how can we combine that together into a business structure. And we did that for a little while together and then decided to split ways. And in the midst of that, the yoga studio closed and I went into hiding for a little while and all this transition and turmoil. And then after all that happened, then you decided to transition out of your corporate job. And so I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit, because I don't think we've ever like broken this down or hashed this out retroactively, but I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about the creation and then the dissolution of that partnership.
So if I remember correctly, we decided to do this together because we were kind of always answering the same question for people. Mm-hmm. And people were really looking for that combination of things that we had, right? Because at that point, mindfulness was kind of becoming a trend. Mm-hmm. And people really wanted that intersection of meditation and action, right? They wanted to feel good and they wanted to have stuff to keep working on. And so I think it was just a really natural thing for you and I to decide to work together. I don't remember it being a challenge to do that. I remember it just being like, well, yeah, let's do this.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
And for me, looking back, that was the perfect way to put one foot in the entrepreneurial pond as I was still doing all the other stuff. So doing that, I feel for me, really helped me to get to the place where I was ready to take the risk to leave my corporate job. I think had we not done that, I don't know if I would be where I am now.
So it was sort of like a bridge step.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It was fun to work in partnership, and it was kind of inspiring and exciting, and it wasn't taking the risk all by yourself. Right? Yeah. Putting together a new workshop, which I was doing a little bit of. You know, we could put together a new workshop and there were going to be two of us.
Right. And we could have coffee at the Bourgeois Pig and...
Exactly. Yeah.
And it would be our planning sessions, our business planning sessions were a little bit more fun when there were two of us than when it's just you waking up and staring at your computer screen by yourself saying, now what?
And it was. We got to be creative together and we got to create things that I don't think either one of us would have created on our own. Like our chakra-based career workshop, which was kind of amazing.
The one that I missed that I really wish we would have figured out how to actually make work was the mindful dating course.
Mindfulness, meditation, and online dating.
Yes.
I still think there's a need for that one out there.
You know, I still think there's a need for it, and I don't know if there's any way to solve online dating.
No. There's just so many things to solve for in that category. So. But But we had a lot of fun writing it.
We did have a lot of fun writing it. And I think our dream was to actually create a course for men because we really worked more with women on that.
No, and I still actually use a lot of the things we thought about in that process. Mm-hmm. I use those with clients today because occasionally the conversation is, I have been so involved in my career that I have not had time to date in X number of years or X number of months or whatever it is. And so we'll talk about that as part of kind of the bigger strategy that we're working on. And so it's very interesting to kind of every now and then flash back to that conversation and be like, oh yeah, these are things we were thinking about way back in, 2012.
And so then we were testing different things. And I think that was really, for both of us, that was really a great opportunity to see what types of things we wanted to be coaching or consulting on, what types of clients we wanted to be working with. And then ultimately, I decided that I thought it would be better if we didn't work together anymore. And it was really hard to come to that conclusion because I was like, I love Katy. I love working with her. I love being part of a team. I love having that support. And it's like when you have a partner, you have someone to celebrate those successes with when something goes well. And you also have somebody to commiserate and share the failure with so that it's not also like all on you. So there is that. But it was really hard for me to come to that conclusion. And I was like, I don't know how to have this conversation. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
What was that like for you to have that conversation and figure out how to go different ways? Like, did it feel like a shock? Was it difficult? Did you freak out at all? What was that like?
There was definitely some freaking out. It was kind of, my landscape changed. Mm-hmm. Because at that point, I was about 2 months from handing in my resignation. Mm-hmm. And so to have something shift like that, it was kind of like, oh my God. Because I had to start thinking about things from a different perspective. Like you said, we were thinking about things together. Mm-hmm. And it was like, how do we make this work together? How do we have this balance? And how do I integrate all of these things in? So for me, it was this like, oh, okay, I have to really go back to the drawing board on my brand strategy and think about who is Mindful You with just me in it, right? What exists, what doesn't exist, what am I excited to talk about? What am I not excited to talk about? Because some of that stuff wasn't as clear when it was two of us because we were trying to work on both of our, we were trying to always integrate both of our skill sets, which was fantastic. I think anyone who came to any of those workshops would have said that you and I worked really well together and we were a great team when we were doing those things. So it was very interesting to then kind of have the spotlight shown back on me. Be like, oh, okay, who am I in this? And I think fortunately at that point, I had gained a lot of confidence as a coach, right? I'd been doing it for several years at that point. It wasn't as scary to be, I had several regular clients.
Right.
It wasn't like, oh no, I don't know how to do this alone. Like I still had my coaching practice on the side. So it was really scary and it was an emotional time in general. So, looking at leaving something I'd been doing for 15 years. Yep. Having the new thing that I was going to go do suddenly change shape. Yeah. And not, was like, whoa, okay. All in all, seeing where you and I both are now, I think it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
I think we would have been doing something exciting and different had we decided to stick together. Mm-hmm. But I think we probably would have gotten to a point where we were both also developing our own businesses on the side. But who knows? Crystal ball,
magic 8-ball.
Right. And I think that's kind of part of it is you and I tend to both roll with change. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, this is the new reality. How do I move into it?
Yeah. And that was like in the midst of me trying to figure out like what on earth, like, who am I? Am I a yoga teacher? Am I a meditation teacher? I don't remember if the podcasting thing, I don't know if that idea was percolating already at that time or if that came after. It's honestly a little bit cloudy. But yeah, I think that having that initial like incubation period together really helped both of us. And then as challenging as it was to sort of like dismantle that and dissolve that, I really think that I hear so many people who are like, I'm going to go into business with my friend. And there's this part of me that's like, partnerships are so hard. They're so hard.
They are.
And they fail so often. And I think that there was this part of me that was like, I would rather stay friends and colleagues with Katy forever than some horrible thing happen within the partnership that would take that away.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that would have been, but there was always this fear in the back of my mind that that statistic of like X% of partnerships end in disaster, you know?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. We wanted an amicable separation, not a nasty divorce.
Correct. It did. I think I remember you calling it something like that at the time, where it was like, yeah, it does kind of feel like that, doesn't it? It feels like we're breaking up.
And it did. We had been a team for, I think, 3 years.
Uh-huh.
And I think that was the hardest part, was like, okay, how do we redefine? Like, how do we dismantle this?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I remember the conversation, a lot of it was about intellectual property. It was like, how do we dismantle the things our brains created together? And how do we figure that out? But you make an excellent point. Working in partnership is hard, right? It's fun, and there's a lot of great benefits to it. But it's also so important that you kind of stay constantly on the same page and are really communicating openly and clearly about everything that's going on. And I think at that point, you and I also both just had so much stuff going on that we were having a hard time being in partnership.
Yeah. And it was like personal and professional, right? Because I think that entrepreneurially, like when you're working for yourself and when you're changing what you're doing for yourself, like you said, there's so many things that come up, and it's like, it also just wreaks havoc with your personal life. And
yes,
I know for me, it's like, I felt like I can't make good decisions in my personal life and in my business life at the same time. One or the other is going to suffer. That's what it felt like at the time.
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
So it is really hard to find that balance. And that's what I like about the way that you've been defining yourself as not just a career change coach, but also this life balance coach. Like, that makes so much sense, that you need to be addressing both and not just let one totally slide by the wayside.
Yes. Which it's so funny. Right when I first start working with a client, we'll do kind of just a big picture life evaluation. Because that way, a lot of times when people are finally ready to make change, it's because something has become so painful that they can't ignore it anymore. You can no longer ignore the rock in your shoe because your foot is now bleeding. So it's like, all right, I got to do something about this. But it's important to kind of take that moment at the beginning of that process and just check in on everything else. Because sometimes that pain is distracting us from other things that can be easily addressed or easily fixed. And the reason I do this with people is because we make better choices when we are not actively in huge amounts of pain. And part of making better choices and not being unaware of them is being conscious of what's going on in your life and just taking a few minutes to just check in and be like, okay, how do I feel about what's going on at home or at work? Or how's my health? How's my communication? How's my relationship with my friends? How's my relationship with my partner? And just checking in on all of those things. And so the exercise I do, there's one area that's called fun and enjoyment, which, you know, people can kind of define however they want. Like, what is your meaning of fun? And I do that exercise a lot with these people who are working on career change. And I get these like big sad eyes when we get to that one. And they're like, when did I stop having fun? I'm just realizing this as I look at this quadrant. Why is my fun number so low? And fortunately, that's one where we can, you know, kind of start work immediately. But it's an important area to address.
I totally remember when you were, because we had also this dynamic where sometimes you could talk to me as Coach Katy and sometimes you could talk to me as friend Katy, and you would have to differentiate between who was speaking to me about certain things. It's like, this is Coach Katy talking. Okay, now this is friend Katy talking, which is really admirable that you can switch between those two. I'm sure sometimes it's not easy. But I remember at those times whenever the fun and enjoyment category would come up in our conversations, I'd be like, ugh, I don't have time for this category. Isn't working fun and enjoyment?
Exactly, right?
I have a hard time with that.
That's so funny because you're right. You're right. Fun and enjoyment. Why is this even on the list?
All right. So for someone who is listening to this and is just starting off on the path of changing careers, or even is just thinking about that. They're in that high percentage of people who are apathetic or actually miserable, and they're just starting out. What advice or words of wisdom would you have for that listener?
Mm-hmm. So the number one thing that I tell people in this situation is don't wait. Don't wait for something to find you. I said this, I think, way back at the beginning, but I talk to so many people who are waiting for the perfect job to walk into their office or to find them in their cubicle or to show up at their house. And they never make any change happen because they're waiting for it to come to them. There's this weird idea that we should all know exactly what we should want to do. That's what it is. There's this idea that we should know what we want to do and should be clearly moving toward it at all times. It's like, well, how can you not know what fulfills you? How do you not know your purpose? You're 35 or you're 42 or you're 57. How do you not know this? Right? So there's this weird piece of shame that's attached to it that says, well, if you don't know this, you're a failure. And there's no way to know. The question I get that goes with this is, do you think there's a job out there that I don't know about that I would probably enjoy doing? And the answer is yes, there's probably a job out there that you don't know about that you would enjoy doing. Absolutely. But you're never going to find it if you don't figure out some place to start. And that's that phase where you have to go in and just start asking questions and answering them and being like, what do I love about what I do now? What do I hate? What do I absolutely never want to do again? What do I find really interesting? What lights me up? And it's starting that research process and creating action rather than sitting in your office or sitting in your cube or sitting in your home office and just hoping and praying that something is going to come find you.
And then the B part of that question is for someone who is thinking about becoming a coach, whatever kind of coach it is, yoga, life coach, career change coach, whatever it is. But for somebody who is interested in this idea of becoming a coach and letting that be their career change, what piece of advice would you have for that person?
The coaching industry has evolved. And like you said, there's a coach on every corner. So some of it is being really clear on the fact that if you are going to be a coach, you need to have an idea of what that career path is going to look like for you. What are you excited to talk to people about? You know, it's having that kind of clarity that says, okay, how do I become the kind of coach that I want to become? What would this mean for me? Rather than, I think it would be really fun to sit and give people advice all day, which is kind of the misnomer that all we do is sit and give people advice all day. You're going to spend, if you want to work for yourself, be very clear about how excited you are to be an entrepreneur. And if you want to work for someone else, because I know a ton of coaches now who work within companies or work for companies, but that also means that you need to be really clear on what that change means. Because if you're coaching inside a company, you're still working for someone else. And you're still in that kind of corporate landscape. So it's thinking about how those different aspects fit in together. What does the end of your coach training process look like? What job are you doing at the end of that? Or are you doing a combination of things? So that's the thing I really wish someone had said to me when I went to coaching school, was like, okay, what does this look like on the other end? And there weren't as many clear definitions of it as there are now. But everybody out there isn't going to be Marie Forleo or Gabby Bernstein or some of those people. Not everyone is going to get to that next place without being really clear on why they want to get to that place. So there's a million different ways to be a coach. Kind of think about which one you feel like would fit best for you.
And then last question, is there anything else that we didn't talk about or that you feel like you're dying to say to our listeners? Anything else you want to share with us?
I would say that it is totally normal to have that imposter voice in your head. I have not yet met a person who doesn't have it. And I talk to a lot of people about what goes on in their heads. So just acknowledge that the voice is there and that it is not always right. And sometimes just knowing that and being like, okay, this is just a voice that has some new commentary today. Keep moving past it. Keep moving forward. You don't have to take every thought you have seriously. So don't let the imposter syndrome win. And you are not alone in having it.
We're all looking off the edge of the same cliff.
We all know where the edge of the cliff is. We're all looking over it. Sometimes it's important to stop looking over the cliff and look around and be like, oh yeah, we're all here together. There's power in that feeling of community.
That was Katy Flatau of Mindful You. And I know that you are going to want to get more from Katy, she is offering her Jumpstart Your Change kit totally free online. Of course, you can link to that and all of the resources we mentioned in the show notes at thecreativeimposter.com/050, as well as links to mindfulyou.com and all of Katy's social media. And remember how we were talking about there being millions and millions of kinds of coaches out there? Well, partly for that reason, I've been really resistant to the idea of calling myself a coach, even though other people have labeled me that in the past. So I'm going to try to own it right now. I am going to call myself a podcasting coach, or more accurately, a podcasting craft coach. That doesn't sound right either, does it? I am currently offering the opportunity to work with me in a coaching capacity on the craft of podcasting. Man, language and copy are tricky, aren't they? I currently have a few coaching spots available to help you work on the craft of podcasting. So if you have ever thought of launching your own podcast, or you have, but there's a few things that you feel like you could be doing better or differently or more easily or more consistently, or you're feeling like this whole editing thing really is a mystery, reach out to me. Let's connect. I have some space to work with some launch clients and some ongoing clients. And hey, if you're thinking that launching a new podcast at the start of 2018 is what you would like to do just in time for New Year's, you're not the only person thinking that. And so I should let you know that if you want to do that, and if you want it to be on Apple Podcasts/iTunes, which is by far the biggest directory for podcasts out there, there are some deadlines that you should be aware of. Yep. You're going to have to get the first couple episodes of that show, or at least a teaser episode of that show, ready before, well, let's say by Thanksgiving. If you want some help or just a consultation, reach out to me at podcastenvy.com, and there is a link to connect with me there. Not ready to schedule a conversation just yet? Visit thecreativeimposter.com/magic, and you can get a free download of my audio training, Audio Coaching, 5 ways to expand your reach with podcasting. And only one of those 5 is actually launching your podcast. Again, that's thecreativeimposter.com/magic. One last announcement before I say goodbye. We are currently in production for season 2 of Power Your Story podcast. This is the podcast that is produced by the high school students that I mentor in Chicago. And we still have some space in season 2 for some listener questions. So check out Power Your Story. Of course, it's linked in the show notes for this episode. It's at poweryourstorypodcast.com. It's on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, Stitcher Radio. Check it out, get a feel for the show, and then send me some questions. What have you always wanted to ask a teenager? If you could pick a high schooler's brain and find out anything, what would that be? You can reach out to me through the website, record an audio of yourself asking the question and email it to me that way, connect on Facebook, whatever you wish. Send me your questions. I would love to feature them on season 2 of the podcast, which will be coming out this holiday season. This episode was mixed by Edwin Ruiz of Mondo Machine. Our theme music is by Jovia Armstrong. I thank you so much for listening, and I am wishing you 1,000,001 opportunities to stop looking over the edge of that proverbial cliff and take a moment to look around and notice, oh yeah, we're all here together.